Excellent advice for relating. Unless you choose a monastic existence tucked away on some remote mountain, you'll spend a significant slice of time interacting with your fellow human beings. As a result, learning how to relate well with others can make your path to a better life much smoother. When you first meet a stranger, let them know you'll remember their name. Making someone feel seen and heard is one of the greatest and cheapest gifts you can bestow. A simple way to do this is to include their name in your reply after they've introduced themselves. You could frame this as, "Nice to meet you, John," or, "Hi, Maria." Conversely, when meeting someone for a second or third time, be gracious and introduce yourself to them again. A straightforward, "Hi Anna, Kevin Kelly," is often all that's needed. To be an exceptional conversationalist, focus on listening to the subtext just as much as the words themselves. Talk less than you feel tempted to. That's usually the right amount. When you do speak, make sure that what you say checks 3 criteria. It's true, necessary, and kind. Life will become lighter if you prioritize being considerate over being correct in your conversations with others. Finally, while generosity is a great virtue to pour into your relations with others, stinginess is best when accepting engagements and making promises. Ultimately, people would prefer you didn't commit in the first place than have you say yes initially, only to pull out at the last minute. You can provide a reason if you'd like, but remember that a polite "no" is a perfectly valid response in and of itself. Excellent advice for parenting. To parent, or not to parent? That is one of life's biggest questions. Raising children is equal parts challenge and reward. If you already have kids or are looking to start a family soon, here are some lessons Kelly learned while bringing up his own. To start with the counterintuitive, one of the best things you can do for your children is to prioritize your relationship with your partner. As the leaders of your family, the love and respect you show for each other provides a powerful model and fosters an atmosphere of psychological safety. Both are tremendously influential. Equally counterintuitive and critical for psychological safety are rules. Kids actually crave clearly defined boundaries. A few explicit statements framed as, "Our family has a rule for XYZ," can be worth their weight in gold. From this foundation, start to build a handful of family rituals into your days and weeks. The size or significance of these routines is irrelevant. What counts is their consistency and the meaning you imbue them with. Dinners together, for instance, may seem like a trivial commitment. But in practice, these meals can offer monumental nourishment, both physically and emotionally. Just make sure it's designated device-free time. Similarly, strive to double the amount of time you think you should spend with your children, and cut the amount of money you spend on them in half. As with any significant relationship, it's your presence they'll remember, not your presence. Reading to or with your kids is one example of a low-cost activity with a high return on investment. On those rare occasions your child comes to you wondering what they should do, put your own preferences on hold and first ask what they want. More often than not, the best advice is to advise them to do just that. Excellent advice for traveling. Travel is one of life's greatest joys. Few experiences can claim to be such a feast for the senses or so effectively reconnect us back to the world. When deciding on your next vacation, let your interests guide you rather than a country's cachet. If you love calligraphy, for example, why not head to China or Japan? Learning French? Choose from one of the 29 countries where it's the official language. Have a Harry Potter-obsessed child? Spend some time in Scotland and England. Conversely, pick a place you know nothing about. What better way to experience a land, culture, and people than with zero expectations? Heed government-issued safety notices, of course, but otherwise, dive headfirst into the unknown. See if you can start your adventure with a remote stop and end in a bigger city or town. Doing so will make your first exposure all the more profound and your transition back home far less jarring. When it comes time to pack, always throw in a few warmer items. The tropics get colder overnight than most expect, and you'll never regret having an extra layer in more Arctic climes. To avoid the annoyance of leaving things behind while on the road, keep your possessions visible and grouped together where possible. If you need to place an item elsewhere, say to charge a device on the opposite wall, put a few larger pieces next to it. It's much harder to forget 3 separate items than a lone one. It's also worth highlighting that travel doesn't have to be expensive or extravagant. Why not pick up the latest guidebook on your city or town, and spend a weekend exploring it through the eyes of the tourist? The newfound appreciation this can generate for your own backyard is just as valuable as any exotic introduction. Excellent advice for surviving. Survival, it's what our species is hardwired to do. For many of us, this looks drastically different from what it did for our prehistoric ancestors. Nowadays, it's more about attaining social validation than outrunning saber-toothed tigers. But no one's immune to random acts of God, so it's wise to learn a handful of best practices. Before we look at a couple of emergency contexts, let's start with a more everyday occurrence: sleep. We all know sleep is critical to surviving, let alone thriving, as a human being. Current general guidelines recommend 8 hours of sleep per night, 1/3 of our day. So invest in as good a bed as you can afford. After all, it's where you'll spend 1/3 of your life. Sleep should also be your first port of call if you find yourself feeling out of sorts during the day. There's no shame in taking a 20-minute nap if you need one. Any raised eyebrows you might incur are a small price to pay for the rest and energy you'll receive in return. When out and about in the world, take a few seconds to identify the emergency exits in any new room, building, or transport you'll spend more than a few minutes in. Should disaster strike, those few seconds could save your life. In the aftermath of such a disaster, remember the rule of 3 for attracting attention. 3 shouts, whistles, or horn blasts. If cars are involved, keep people in their respective vehicles if possible. Standing by the collision site is more dangerous than remaining put. Just as counterintuitive is monitoring temperature in pure survival mode scenarios. We're quick to jump to finding food and water, but it's actually a lack of shade or warmth that will get us first. Memorize the rule of 3 here too. You can last 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, but only 3 hours without temperate shelter. Prioritize accordingly. Excellent advice for succeeding. If pursuing survival is our hardwiring, chasing success is our operating system. For Kelly, succeeding isn't about being the best at something. It's about being the only of something. The most abundant opportunities and rewards lie in yet-to-be-charted territories. So how do you uncover what this might be for you? Think about what made you unusual as a kid. Would you go days without leaving your bedroom if you had a new Lego set? Were you constantly getting told off for doodling anytime you had a pen in hand? Could you name every constellation visible from your backyard? Your flavor of childhood, weird, won't be the ultimate answer, but it can certainly point you in the right direction. Dig deeper and explore overlooked nuances, unexpected intersections, and unconventional conversations within this narrow field. Ironically, it's the strange that often makes one popular. If specializing in the esoteric doesn't feel right for you, consider prototyping versions of more conventional approaches. Stay open to trying things, and set aside any pressure to hold tight to a singular definition of success. After all, our first ideas are rarely the best. Great is frequently found only after wading through swamps of bad and mediocre. Of course, this necessitates an unwavering commitment to doing the work, hypothesizing, trialing, failing, adjusting, and repeating ad nauseum. So much so that simply showing up on bad days is worth far more than superhuman efforts on rare good days. What can be a support here is to think of your progress in terms of the distance already covered rather than the distance you still have to go. It can be demoralizing to focus only on the mountaintop. So, every now and then, turn around and acknowledge how far you've come. An excellent life is more a journey than a destination.